By sundown, the children of Whitaker Ranch would beg a rejected baker not to leave, but that morning, the whole town watched her get thrown out with flour in her hair. Mabel Hartwell hit the snowy boardwalk on her knees outside Pritchard's bakery, one hand still wrapped around the handle of her worn wooden bread box. The winter wind came sharp down Main Street, cold enough to sting her fair cheeks and turn every breath white, but the laughter behind her burned hotter than the stove she had been tending since before dawn. A torn sack of flour split open beside her boot and spread across the boards like spilled moonlight. Mrs. Abigail Pritchard stood in the doorway with her arms folded tight, her Sunday black dress clean as a judge's coat. "You are done here, Mabel," she said, loud enough for the mercantile, the feed store, and the barber's window to hear. Mabel kept her eyes on the flour. If she looked up, they would see what their words did. If they saw that, they would only sharpen them. "I did not steal your recipe," she said quietly. "No?" Abigail's laugh was small and hard. Then how did a woman with no husband, no family, and no proper place in town suddenly think she could bake bread good enough for paying customers? A man near the hitching rail chuckled into his glove. Maybe she ate the proof. Someone else laughed. Mabel's fingers tightened around the bread box until the handle creaked. She was a soft, full-bodied woman, chubby through the waist and arms, the kind of woman strangers thought they had permission to measure with their eyes. She had been measured all her life and found wanting by people who had never tasted hunger, never slept under a roof that could be taken from them, never learned how much dignity could fit inside silence. She pushed one palm against the icy boardwalk and rose slowly. Snow clung to the hem of her brown dress. Flour dusted her apron. Her bonnet had slipped loose and pale strands of hair stuck to her mouth. She wiped them away and bent to gather the little she owned. A cracked jar of yeast starter, 2 linen cloths, 1 dull knife for scoring loaves, and the bread box her mother had carried from Missouri. Then a horse stopped hard in the street. The laughter faded, not out of kindness, but because Caleb Whitaker had come riding in with his youngest child wrapped in a quilt against his chest. Everyone in town knew Caleb. Widowed rancher. 3 children. 30 miles north where the snow-covered fences clear to the top rail. A man who spoke less than church bells and looked at the world like it had already taken all it was owed. The little girl in his arms was too still. Her face was pale, her lips dry, and one small hand hung from the quilt without strength. Caleb swung down and crossed the street without greeting a soul. "Pritchard," he said. "I need bread soft enough for a sick child. Today." Abigail's expression changed so quickly it might have been practiced. "Of course, Mr. Whitaker. I can send something by tomorrow. Today. The ovens are already cooling." His jaw flexed. "She has not eaten proper in 3 days." Mabel looked at the child then, really looked. 4 years old, maybe. Fine fair lashes against her cheeks. A little body worn down by grief, cold, or both. Mabel forgot the flour on her dress. She forgot the town watching. She stepped forward before she remembered she had no right. "Warm milk bread," she said. Caleb's eyes moved to her. Gray eyes. Tired eyes. "What?" "Warm milk bread," Mabel repeated. "Soft crumb. Little honey if you have it. No hard crust. If she cannot swallow much, you soak it with broth or milk. Small bites. Slow." Abigail scoffed. "Do not mind her. She is no longer employed here." The child stirred. Just once. Her fingers, limp a moment ago, curled toward the torn ribbon of Mabel's apron as if she had heard the word bread and followed it out of the dark. Caleb saw it. So did Mabel. So did every person who had been laughing a minute before. The rancher looked from his daughter's hand to Mabel's flour-white apron. "Can you bake through winter?" he asked. Mabel swallowed. The town held its breath, hoping she would understand the insult of being the last choice. But Mabel was looking at the child. "Yes, sir," she said. "If there is a stove, I can bake." Caleb turned toward his wagon. "Then get in." Caleb Whitaker did not offer Mabel his hand. When she climbed into the wagon, he settled his little girl against the folded blanket on the seat, tucked the quilt higher beneath her chin, and picked up the reins as if kindness were a tool he had forgotten how to hold. Mabel sat on the far side with her bread box on her lap and the cracked jar of yeast starter pressed against her stomach to keep it from freezing. Main Street watched them leave. No one called goodbye. No one wished her luck. Behind them, Mrs. Pritchard stood in the bakery doorway, small and sharp against the warm window glow, and Mabel kept her eyes forward until the town disappeared behind a curtain of blowing snow. For nearly 5 miles, Caleb said nothing. The wagon creaked through white drifts, the wheels catching in frozen ruts, the horses lowering their heads against the wind. Mabel could hear the child breathing, shallow and uneven, under the quilt. Every few minutes, Caleb looked down at her without moving his face. That was how Mabel first understood him. Not from his words, because there were none, but from the way his gloved hand hovered near the little girl as if he could hold her to this world by sheer will. At last he spoke. "Name is Clara." Mabel nodded. "She is very cold." "I know." "How old?" "4." The answer came flat, but his jaw tightened afterward. "My oldest is Elsie. She is 9. My boy is Noah. 7. Do they know I am coming?" "They know I went for help." Mabel looked at the white road ahead. "And am I help?" Caleb did not answer at once. The horses pulled another dozen yards before he said, "You are work." Mabel accepted that. Work was safer than charity. Work had rules. Work could be earned. Pity was a plate set down with one hand and taken away with the other. Caleb glanced at her bread box. "You will stay through winter. You bake. You cook if it is needed. You see that my children eat. You do not ask questions about my wife. You do not move her things. You get paid at thaw. Then you leave." The words should have stung. Instead, they steadied her. "One winter," she said. "Nothing more. Nothing more. Do you have flour?" "Some." "Milk?" "One cow still giving." "Honey?" "A little." "Wood?" He looked at her. Then, almost offended. "I run a ranch, Miss Hartwell." "I have wood. Then I can start tonight." Something passed across his face, not warmth, not trust, but the first small crack in the wall he had built around his grief. By the time they reached Whitaker Ranch, the sky had gone iron gray. The house stood low against the hill, its porch half buried, its windows dark except for one yellow square near the kitchen. The barns leaned into the wind. Fence posts vanished under snowdrifts that rose nearly to the top rail. It should have looked strong. Instead, it looked like a place holding its breath. Caleb carried Clara inside first. Mabel followed with her bread box, boots quiet on the plank floor. The kitchen was colder than any kitchen had a right to be. Ash lay gray in the stove. A chair by the window sat untouched, with a faded shawl folded over its back. No dust rested on it, which told Mabel more than dust ever could. A boy stood near the pantry with his arms crossed. He had Caleb's gray eyes and none of his stillness. "She is not staying," Noah said. Caleb removed his hat. "She is working." The last one worked too. She cried by supper and left before breakfast. Mabel set her bread box on the table. "I do not cry over supper." Noah narrowed his eyes. "You will." From the corner, a thin, fair-haired girl watched without a sound. "Elsie." She held a rag doll by one arm and stared at Mabel's apron as if trying to decide whether it was dangerous. Mabel gave her no smile too bright to trust. She only nodded. "Evening." Elsie did not answer. Caleb laid Clara on a bench near the stove, and Mabel heard the small, dry sound of the child trying to swallow. That sound moved her faster than any insult had. "Where's the kindling?" she asked. Noah pointed with his chin, still glaring. Mabel opened the stove and found only a few tired coals hiding under ash. She reached for the match tin on the shelf. Empty. Caleb cursed softly under his breath and turned toward the mudroom. Before he could leave, Elsie stepped forward. In her small white hand lay one match, saved like a secret. She placed it on the table beside Mabel and stepped back again. No one spoke. Mabel picked up the match carefully, as if it were a gift too fragile to name. "Thank you," she said. Elsie lowered her eyes, but she did not run away. Mabel struck Elsie's single match against the stove plate and cupped the flame as if she were protecting a living thing. The fire caught slow, first a thin orange lick beneath the kindling, then a stronger glow that pushed back the gray cold gathered in the corners of the kitchen. She warmed milk in a small pan, measured flour by feel, and opened her cracked jar of starter with the care of a woman opening the last door left to her. Caleb stood near the back wall with Clara wrapped in his arms, watching without stepping closer. Noah watched too, but his watching had teeth in it. "You are using too much," he said. "Maybe," Mabel answered. "You do not know our stove." "Not yet. You do not know what Clara likes." Mabel glanced at the little girl, whose eyes had opened to narrow blue slits above the quilt. "Then you can tell me." Noah looked surprised, then suspicious. "She likes nothing." "Nobody likes nothing." "She liked Mama's bread." The room changed at that word. Caleb's hand tightened on the quilt. Elsie lowered her face toward her rag doll. Mabel kept her palms in the dough and made her voice gentle enough not to bruise the silence. "Then I will not try to make your Mama's bread. I will make mine, and Clara can decide if it is worth a bite." Noah came to the table as if he meant to challenge the dough itself. While Mabel turned to check the milk, his small hand darted toward the salt crock. Caleb saw it and took one step forward, but Mabel lifted her hand without looking back. "Let him." Noah froze. "I know the sound of a salt spoon, Mr. Noah." The boy's face went red. "I did not do anything. Not enough to ruin it." She turned back, took the oversalted corner of dough, folded it once, and set it in front of him. "This piece is angry. You can throw it away, or you can work it until it becomes useful. Dough cannot be angry." "Are you sure?" She pressed her knuckles into the larger mound. "Feels stubborn to me." Noah stared at her, then at Caleb, waiting for the scolding that always came when a child tested the edge of a grown person's patience. Caleb said nothing. Mabel dusted Noah's hands with flour. "Push down. Fold over. Turn it." Again. He did it once, hard. Then again. The table shook. Clara stirred, but did not cry. Elsie took one quiet step closer. For the next 20 minutes, the kitchen held only the sounds of work, dough thumping under small fists, milk simmering, wood shifting in the stove, wind worrying the window glass. Mabel shaped the soft loaves small so they would bake faster. She brushed the tops with milk, slid them into the oven, and stood with one hand braced against the stove door while the heat climbed into her chilled fingers. The smell came before the bread was done. Warm milk, flour, yeast, and a little honey. Clara turned her head toward it. Caleb noticed. His whole body went still. When Mabel pulled the first loaf free, the crust had gone too dark on one side, but the center gave gently beneath her thumb. "Not pretty," Noah said. "Good," Mabel answered. Pretty bread is sometimes too proud to be eaten. She tore the softest piece, soaked it in warm milk, cooled it with 2 careful breaths, and held it near Clara without forcing it to her mouth. "Only smell it first," she whispered. Clara's lashes fluttered. Her little lips parted. She took the smallest bite a child could take and held it there so long Caleb looked away, as if hope itself were too sharp to watch. Then Clara swallowed. No one moved. Mabel prepared another piece. Clara took that one too. Noah stopped kneading. Elsie's fingers opened around her doll. Caleb gripped the back of the chair by the cold window, the one with the faded shawl, and bowed his head. "She ate," Noah said, not loudly, not softly, but like he was afraid the words might vanish. Clara reached again, weak but certain. Mabel fed her one more bite, then set the bowl down before the child tired. "Enough for now." "More," Clara whispered. It was barely a sound. Still, it filled the kitchen. Caleb looked at Mabel then, and for the first time since town, he did not look at her as work, or trouble, or winter labor. He looked at her as if the stove had given back. Something he thought the snow had buried for good. At supper, Noah took the crust when he thought nobody saw. Elsie placed a chipped plate at the table's 4th setting and pushed it toward Mabel without a word. Mabel did not sit until Caleb gave a small nod. Later, when Clara fell asleep on the bench, her hand found the torn ribbon of Mabel's apron and held on. Mabel bent to loosen the tiny fingers, but Caleb's voice stopped her from the doorway. Let her sleep. By morning, the kitchen had changed enough to frighten Caleb. Not because it was loud, and not because it was messy, but because it had begun to breathe again. Fire snapped in the stove before daylight. Coffee steamed on the back burner. Clara slept on the bench wrapped in 2 quilts, her face softer than it had looked in weeks. Noah sat at the table with flour up to both wrists, shaping little knots of dough with a seriousness that made him look older and younger at the same time. Elsie stood near the window, silent as ever, watching Mabel move from pantry to stove to table with steady hands, and no claim on anything that was not hers. Caleb had come in from the barn expecting cold biscuits and distance. Instead, he found the smell of honey bread and heard himself pause in the doorway like a stranger outside his own life. Mabel did not see him at first. She had a flour cloth over one shoulder and her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Snowlight touched her pale hair where it had slipped loose from its pins. She was humming under her breath, not a tune meant for company, just the kind of small sound a woman makes when work is hard but familiar. Caleb's eyes went to the table, then to her hands, then to the wooden rolling pin beneath her palms. The room went out of him. "Put that down." His voice cut through the warm kitchen so sharply that Noah's dough flattened under his fist. Mabel froze. Elsie looked up. Clara stirred but did not wake. Caleb stepped fully inside, hat still in his hand, boots wet with snow. "I said put it down." Mabel lifted both hands at once. The rolling pin rested in the dusting of flour between them. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not know." "You did not ask." "No, sir. That was my wife's." The words came quiet, but every child in the room heard the weight of them. Mabel looked at the faded shawl on the chair by the window, then back at the rolling pin, and the understanding passed over her face without needing explanation. She reached for a clean cloth, careful not to touch the wood with bare fingers again. "I will wash it proper and put it wherever you want it kept. I will use a bottle or my hands from now on. No one uses it. Then no one will." Noah pushed back from the table. "You scared her." Caleb's gaze moved to his son. "This is not your concern. It is bread. It is not bread." That silenced the boy, because even Noah could hear the truth in it. Mabel folded the cloth once, then twice, and placed it beside the rolling pin. She did not cry. She did not defend herself. She only stood there in her worn brown dress, flour on her apron, full body still as if she had learned long ago that taking up less space could keep a room from turning against her. "Mr. Whitaker," she said softly, "I did not come here to take a dead woman's place." Caleb flinched as if she had touched a bruise nobody could see. Mabel lowered her eyes. "I only came because your child was hungry." The stove popped. Wind pressed snow against the window glass. Then Elsie moved. For 2 days, the girl had barely crossed more than 6 feet of floor unless told to. Now she walked to the table, picked up the rolling pin with both hands, and held it against her chest. Caleb went still. "Elsie." She did not answer. She carried the rolling pin around the table and set it back in front of Mabel. Not near Caleb. Not on the shelf. In front of Mabel. Noah stopped breathing through his mouth. Clara opened her eyes. Mabel looked down at the child, then at Caleb, afraid to move. Caleb's face had gone pale beneath the weathered tan. "Elsie," he said again, but this time his voice was not a command. It was a plea. Elsie touched the rolling pin once, then touched the dough. Her meaning was plain enough for even grief to understand. "Keep going." Mabel's hand trembled, but she did not reach for it. "Only if your father says." Elsie turned to him. She still did not speak. She did not have to. Caleb stood in the doorway with melting snow at his boots and his wife's memory lying on the table between them. At last, he looked away first. "Use it for the children's bread," he said. "Nothing else." Mabel nodded. "Yes, sir." That night, after supper, Caleb found Elsie asleep on the floor outside the kitchen door with her rag doll under one arm and Mabel's flour cloth tucked in her other hand, as if she feared the baker might vanish before morning. The note appeared because Noah was looking for sugar. Mabel had sent him to the pantry with a tin cup and a warning not to mistake salt for sweet again, and he had gone with his chin high, proud to be trusted with anything that mattered. The pantry was narrow, smelling of apples gone soft, dried beans, coffee, and the clean flour Mabel had saved in a stone crock. Her spare apron hung on a peg just inside the door, still dusted white from morning work. When Noah tugged the sugar sack from the shelf, the apron shifted and a folded paper slipped from its pocket to the floor. He might have left it there if his name had not been the kind of boy who picked at closed things. He opened it. Mabel heard his breath change before she saw his face. She was at the table shaping biscuits while Clara sat near the stove with a cup of warm milk between both hands. Elsie was drawing letters in a thin spread of flour, silent but intent, making the first crooked line of her own name. Noah stepped out of the pantry with the paper gripped so tight it wrinkled. "Who wrote this?" Mabel looked up. The dough under her fingers went still. "Noah." "Who wrote it?" Caleb came in from the mudroom carrying split kindling, snow melting on his shoulders. "What is it?" Noah read before anyone could stop him, his voice shaking with a child's anger he did not yet know how to carry. "No man wants a fat baker unless he is hungry enough." The words landed in the kitchen like soot. Clara lowered her cup. Elsie wiped one hand across her flower letters and blurred them away. Caleb set the kindling down slowly. Mabel reached for the paper, but Noah stepped back. "That is a lie. Give it to me, please." "It is a lie." "Yes," she said, though the word cost her. "But it is an old lie. It does not need new breath." Noah's eyes were bright. "Mrs. Pritchard wrote it." Mabel did not answer. He did not need her to. He turned toward the back door as if the 30 miles of snow between the ranch and town were nothing but a hallway. Caleb caught the movement and spoke once. "Noah." The boy stopped, but his fists stayed closed around the paper. "She cannot say that." "She already did," Mabel said. "And here I am, still making biscuits." "Why are you not mad?" "I was." "Then be mad now." Mabel wiped her hands on a cloth and crossed to him. She did not take the paper by force. She held out her palm and waited until he placed it there. "Listen to me. People can hand you ugly words. You do not have to build a house out of them." Noah stared at the floor. "I wanted to make her sorry. Do not spend your good hands on someone else's small heart." The kitchen went quiet again, but not cold. Caleb watched Mabel fold the note once, then twice, and lay it beside the stove. He had seen shame before. He had seen pride. What he had not seen in a long time was a woman standing with both wounds and dignity in the same room, refusing to let either one rule her. "What happened in town?" he asked. Mabel turned back to the biscuits. "You saw enough. I saw the end." "Most people only care about the end." "I am asking about the beginning." She pressed the biscuit cutter into the dough. "Once. Twice. Mrs. Pritchard hired me when her hands started aching too much to knead. I baked before sunrise, cleaned after dark, and slept in the storeroom when weather was bad. Customers liked the bread until they learned which hands made it. Then she said my size made the front counter look common. Said men laughed when I bent over flour sacks. Said women did not want to buy wedding cakes from someone no decent man had chosen." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Mabel lifted the biscuits onto a pan. When her milk bread started selling, she called it hers. When I asked for my pay, she called me a thief. Noah whispered, "That is not fair." "No," Mabel said. "But fair and true are not always served at the same table." Caleb stepped closer, not close enough to crowd her, only close enough that his voice did not have to cross the whole room. "You are not too much for this kitchen." Mabel's hands stopped over the pan. Clara looked up. Noah looked at his father as if he had just heard him speak a language he did not know Caleb possessed. Elsie picked up one finger and wrote a single word in the flour that had survived her sweeping hand. "Stay." By the second week, the Whitaker house no longer woke like a place expecting sorrow. It woke to the sound of Mabel opening the stove, to coffee beginning its low dark song in the pot, to the scrape of flour across the table, to Noah dragging a chair closer because he said his hands worked better near the dough, though everyone knew he simply liked being trusted before sunrise. Breakfast came at 6 sharp. Not fancy. Oatmeal with brown sugar when there was any, biscuits split and warmed, bacon stretched thin, coffee for Caleb, milk for the children, and always one small piece of soft bread set aside for Clara before anyone else reached for the platter. Clara began to eat without being coaxed. First 3 bites, then 5, then half a slice with honey melted into it. Color returned to her cheeks slowly, like dawn deciding whether the day was worth keeping. Elsie still did not speak, but she stayed in the kitchen now. She wrote letters in flour with one finger while Mabel worked, wiping them away before Caleb could praise her too much. Mabel learned not to make a fuss. A fuss could scare a wounded thing back into hiding. Instead, she would simply say, "That is a fine E," or "Your S has a brave curve to it," and Elsie would bend her head, hiding the smallest pleased look behind her pale hair. Noah changed in louder ways. When anger rose in him, Mabel put dough in front of his fists. "Fold it before it folds you," she would say, and the boy would shove and turn and press until the storm inside him had somewhere useful to go. By the end of that week, the ranch hands started coming through the back door with reasons that did not fool anyone. A broken latch. A question for Caleb. A need to warm their gloves. Really, they came for the smell of lunch pails lined along the counter, each wrapped in cloth, each holding bread thick enough to last a man through fence work in 10-degree weather. Caleb noticed everything and said little. He fixed the draft under the kitchen door without being asked. He carried in split wood before the box emptied. He repaired the loose shelf above the flour barrel and made it strong enough for Mabel's jars. One evening, he came in with a smooth board sanded clean and set it beside the stove. "For kneading," he said. Mabel ran her fingers over the pale wood. "You made this?" "Had scrap pine. It is too good for scrap." Caleb looked away. "Use it anyway." But every good thing in that house had a shadow, and the shadow was thaw. Mabel counted the season in signs she wished she did not understand. Icicles shortening along the porch roof. The creek sounding under its lid of ice. Mud showing near the barn door at noon before freezing again by supper. One winter, Caleb had said. Nothing more. So Mabel taught herself not to look too long at the children when they laughed. She taught herself not to love the way Clara leaned against her skirt while eating. She taught herself not to listen for Caleb's boots slowing outside the kitchen before he came in. That night, while Mabel stirred soup and Caleb mended a harness strap near the stove, Clara sat on the floor wrapping a piece of ribbon around her doll. She looked from Mabel to the window, where snow had begun to loosen from the sill in wet drops. "Papa," she said. Caleb looked up. "Yes, sweetheart." Clara's little forehead folded with worry. "When winter ends, does Miss Mabel die too?" The harness strap slipped from Caleb's hands. Mabel turned from the stove, spoon held still above the pot. Noah stopped with bread halfway to his mouth. Elsie's flour-covered finger froze over the table. Clara looked frightened by the silence she had made. "Mama went away in winter," she whispered. "If Miss Mabel goes when winter is done, where do people go when they leave us?" Caleb stood, but for once he had no answer ready. Mabel set the spoon down and knelt carefully in front of Clara, her full skirts settling around her on the warm kitchen floor. "Leaving and dying are not the same thing, honey." Clara's eyes filled. "But they both take people out of the house." Mabel reached for her hand, then stopped, letting Clara choose. The child chose at once, folding her small fingers into Mabel's palm. Caleb watched that handhold as if it were a question he had been avoiding since the day he brought her home. The thaw came first as a sound. Not warmth, not green grass, not birds, but water moving under ice in the creek beyond the barn, a low restless murmur that made Mabel look toward the window every time she heard it. By noon, wet snow slid from the porch roof in heavy sheets, and mud showed dark along the wagon track. Caleb was in the lower pasture with 2 ranch hands, moving cattle away from the softened creek bank. Mabel was in the kitchen with the children, rolling dough for noon bread while Clara cut crooked circles from the scraps, Noah stacked kindling by the stove, and Elsie wrote words in flour she still would not say aloud. Home. Stove. Bread. Stay. Mabel saw the last word and gently covered it with a dusting of flour before her own heart could answer it. Then the dogs barked. Noah went to the window first. His face changed. "Town wagon," he said. Mabel wiped her hands on her apron and looked out. A black buggy had stopped near the porch, wheels sunk deep in thawing mud. Mrs. Abigail Pritchard stepped down in a clean navy coat, lifting her skirt away from the slush as if the ranch itself might stain her. Behind her came Deputy Warren Pike, broad hat low, one hand resting on a folded paper tucked inside his coat. Mabel felt every warm thing in the kitchen pull back from her. Clara climbed off the chair. "Miss Mabel?" "It is all right." Her voice sounded steady enough to fool a child, but not herself. Noah moved to the door. I will get Pa. No, Mabel said. Your father is working. They came for you. Then I will speak to them. Abigail knocked once and entered before anyone answered. Her eyes moved over the kitchen, the breadboard Caleb had made, the warm stove, the children dusted with flour, and finally Mabel. The smile that followed had no kindness in it. Well, Abigail said, you made yourself comfortable. Deputy Pike removed his hat. Miss Hartwell. Deputy. Mabel folded her hands in front of her apron. What brings you 30 miles in mud? Abigail gave a soft laugh. Justice, if the word still means anything this far from town. Noah stepped forward. She did not do anything. Children should not interrupt grown matters. Then grown people should tell the truth. Mabel touched his shoulder, not to silence him, only to steady him. Deputy Pike pulled out the folded paper. Mrs. Pritchard has filed a complaint. Theft of a commercial recipe, unpaid lodging debt, and refusal to return property belonging to Pritchard's bakery. Mabel looked from the paper to Abigail. Property? Abigail's eyes dropped to the cracked jar of starter near the stove. That yeast was cultivated in my kitchen. My mother carried that starter from Missouri. So you say. The deputy shifted, uncomfortable but official. Miss Hartwell, it would be best if you came back to town and answered the claim. Clara's small hands wrapped around Mabel's skirt. No, Abigail glanced down at her. Poor child. You must not cling to hired help. It confuses the heart. Mabel felt Clara tremble. Do not speak to her that way. Abigail's smile thinned. A woman like you always does this. You find a lonely house, a grieving man, motherless children, and you settle in where you were never invited to belong. Mabel went still. The words hurt because they found the very fear she had been carrying since the first night. She looked toward the window, toward the pasture where Caleb was too far to see. She could end this quietly. She could pick up her bread box, step outside, and keep Abigail's poison away from the children. I will get my things, Mabel said. Clara cried out and held tighter. Noah planted himself between Mabel and the door. No, move, Noah. No, Elsie stood from the table. Flour covered one finger. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were fixed on Abigail. Deputy Pike sighed. Son, let the lady pass. Noah did not move. Clara pressed her face into Mabel's apron. Mabel tried to loosen the child's hands gently, but Clara only clung harder. Then Elsie walked to the doorway and stood beside Noah, small and silent, blocking the path with her thin shoulders. Abigail gave a brittle laugh. This is ridiculous. Mabel whispered, Elsie, sweetheart, please. Elsie turned her head toward Mabel. Her lips parted. For a moment, only the thawing creak could be heard under the kitchen silence. Then the girl who had not spoken since her mother's burial looked at the deputy, then at Abigail, and said, clear enough for the whole room to hear, she belongs here. For one full breath, no one in the kitchen moved. The stove popped softly. A drop of thaw water slid down the outside of the window. Mabel could not feel her own hands. Elsie stood in the doorway with her chin lifted, small as a fence post and twice as steady, while the words she had locked away for nearly 2 years hung in the room like a bell still ringing. Deputy Pike lowered the paper a little. Abigail stared at the child as if speech itself had betrayed her. What did you say? She asked. Elsie looked at Mabel first, and that made Mabel press one hand to the edge of the table because her knees had gone weak. Then Elsie turned back. She belongs here. The second time was softer, but stronger. Clara clung to Mabel's skirt and began to cry, not the frightened cry from the early winter nights, but the aching kind a child makes when love is trying to stay brave. She makes the house warm, Clara said. Noah stepped beside his sister, his flour-dusted hands curled but still, just the way Mabel had taught him. She taught me not to hit when I am mad. She gives me dough. She waits until I can talk. Abigail made a sharp sound. This is sentimental nonsense. No, Noah said. It is breakfast and supper and Clara eating and Elsie talking. That is not nonsense. Mabel whispered, Noah, honey. He shook his head without looking back. You said not to spend my good hands on small hearts. I am using my voice. Deputy Pike shifted his weight, muddy boots darkening the clean-swept floor. "Mrs. Pritchard, perhaps we should wait until Mr. Whitaker returns." "We will do no such thing. This woman has bewitched a house full of grieving children with bread and pity." The back door opened before Mabel could answer. Caleb stood there in his work coat, mud on his boots, wind at his shoulders, and 2 ranch hands behind him on the porch. He had heard enough. His eyes went to Elsie first. The child looked at him, frightened only after the courage had passed. Caleb removed his hat slowly. "Say it again, sweetheart," he said. Elsie swallowed. Her fingers found Noah's sleeve. "She belongs here." Caleb's face changed in a way no one in that kitchen had ever seen. Not breaking. Not smiling. Something deeper, like a locked door opening from the inside. He stepped past the deputy and stood beside his children, not in front of them, not over them, but beside them. "You came for a rejected baker," he said to Abigail, his voice low and even. "But you are standing in front of my children's home." "She stays." Abigail's cheeks flushed. "Your grief has made you foolish." "My grief made me quiet." "Do not mistake the two." Deputy Pike unfolded the paper again, but less firmly now. "Mr. Whitaker, there remains the matter of the recipe claim." Caleb nodded once. "Then we will settle it." He crossed to the shelf above the cold pantry, reached behind a row of old jars, and took down a small blue notebook tied with faded string. Mabel had seen it before but never touched it. Caleb laid it on the table as carefully as if it breathed. "My wife kept household notes," he said. "Recipes. Remedies. Names of women who shared them." Abigail's face lost its color. Caleb opened to a page marked with pressed lavender. His finger rested on neat handwriting. "Warm milk bread, from Mrs. Hartwell of Missouri, taught at church supper, October 14th. The kitchen went utterly still. Mabel covered her mouth. Her mother's name was there, not in memory, not in defense, but in ink. Caleb turned the book toward Deputy Pike. The starter was hers. The bread was hers. The lie was not. The deputy read, then folded. Abigail's complaint without another word. One of the ranch hands on the porch took off his hat. Abigail looked from the notebook to Mabel, then to the children guarding her with flour on their sleeves and tears on their faces. For the first time since Mabel had known her, Abigail had nothing ready to say. Caleb closed the notebook. "This ranch has no business with you today." Abigail lifted her chin, but the room had already left her. She turned and stepped out into the wet snow, Deputy Pike following with the useless paper in his hand. When the buggy wheels finally pulled away, Mabel stood in the kitchen she had warmed and still felt the old rule pressing against her heart. She looked at Caleb, then at the children. "You hired me for one winter," she said. "The thaw is coming." The thaw did come, not all at once, but in slow mercies. Snow withdrew from the fence lines. The creek ran silver and loud past the cottonwoods. Mud dried in patches along the wagon road, and the first brave grass showed itself near the barn where the sun stayed longest. Mabel watched every sign as if the earth were counting down against her. She kept baking. She kept packing lunch pails. She kept teaching Clara to butter bread without tearing it, Noah to shape rolls instead of pounding them flat, and Elsie to say one new word each morning before the stove grew hot. But at night, when the house settled and the children slept, Mabel folded one dress into her bread box, then unfolded it before dawn. Caleb saw the small preparations and said nothing. That was the hardest kindness. He did not trap her with gratitude. He did not ask in front of the children. He did not make staying feel like another debt she had to repay. On the last morning of March, Mabel rose before the rooster and cleaned the kitchen until every surface shone in the blue light. She fed the starter, covered it with linen, and placed it near the stove where it would not chill. She set 3 small loaves on the table, one with extra honey for Clara, one dark-crusted for Noah, and one braided carefully for Elsie because the girl liked patterns she could follow with her finger. Then Mabel tied her bread box shut. Her coat hung beside the door, plain and brown, the same coat she had worn when Caleb brought her from town. She reached for it, but stopped. On the table, where there had been only bread a moment before, lay the old rolling pin. Beside it rested a new apron, stitched from blue calico with uneven hems. A folded paper sat on top. Mabel opened it with careful fingers. Noah had written the words in large crooked letters. "Please do not go." The room blurred. Behind her, Clara whispered, "I helped with the pocket." Mabel turned. All three children stood in the kitchen doorway in their nightclothes, hair mussed, faces solemn. Clara ran first and wrapped both arms around Mabel's waist. Noah came next, trying to look angry and failing. Elsie stood last, holding the edge of the doorframe, gathering courage like a candle gathers flame. "You said leaving and dying are not the same," Elsie said. Her voice trembled, but it held. "But leaving still makes the house empty." Mabel sank to her knees so she could look at them level. "I was hired for winter." Noah shook his head. "You are not winter." Clara pressed her cheek to Mabel's apron. "You are bread." That almost broke her, but it was Elsie who finished it. The girl stepped forward and placed the rolling pin in Mabel's hands. "This is your kitchen too." Caleb's boots sounded softly behind them. He stood near the mudroom with 2 cups of coffee, steam rising between his hands. He had shaved. His hair was damp from the wash basin, and his gray eyes carried no command, only truth. "Children," he said gently, "give Miss Hartwell room." "She is leaving," Noah said. Caleb looked at Mabel. "Only if she chooses to." The children grew quiet. Mabel rose slowly, the rolling pin held against her chest. Caleb set 1 cup on the table for her, then kept the other in his hands as if he needed something to hold. "I will not ask you to stay because they cried," he said. "I will not ask because you saved us bread by bread, though you did. I will ask because this house is better when you are in it. My children are better. I am better." Mabel could not speak. Caleb took 1 breath, steady and plain. "Stay because you want to. Stay with wages, with respect. With your own name on the account in town. Stay with a room that is yours and a kitchen no one can take from you. And if someday you want more than that, I will be here, learning how to deserve the asking." Outside, spring water ran under